Hey everyone, welcome to another G News update. Well, something's got Mike worried. He's written another Mike's Minute and he's blithering on about how at some stage Labor's going to actually have to come up with some detail about who they're going to rule in, who they're going to rule out, which is obviously months and months away into the future. And what's making Mike so worried? Why is he panicking? Well, he's going on and on about how Labor have said they're going to campaign in the electorates where TPM are, and he thinks there's some sort of big problem here. He thinks that that there's no way that Labor can ever kind of win an election without TPM, so that all the talk of them campaigning against them is somehow waffle. But all of Mike's arguments don't add up to anything, and it's kind of like, well, what's actually triggering Mike? And I was thinking about this, and I think what it is that we've got Labor on 38% this week in the Talbot Mills poll. 38%. And if you think about 38%, what does that mean? Well, that means that since the election in 2023, Labor have gone from somewhere around about 27 all the way up to 38. So that's about 11 points. And at the same time, National's gone from 37 down to somewhere, a range. Maybe it's 30, maybe it's 29, maybe it's 31, somewhere around there. But let's just say it's 31. So they've lost 6. And when you add that on to the fact that Labor have gained 11, then, wow, what do you think? Or 10, or whatever it is. So you get about a 16 or a 17 point difference that's actually happened in the space of 2 years. 17 points in the polls have moved. And at the same time, you've had Mike Hosking and quite a number of commentators writing off Labor, saying, well, they were so burned by, the election in 2023, they can never come back, and they can never have this. They can't have this prime minister. They can't have that prime minister. They can't win an election. And today, Mike was saying the same thing. I mean, it's some kind of oracle, right? And what he said is meant for you and you alone. But he's basically just saying, he doesn't know, but he's going to play a confidence game, which once again kind of indicates that he's actually quite worried. He's a bit insecure here. He's playing confidence that he just knows. He knows the All Blacks will win. He knows that National will win the next election. He even went and said, oh, well, it'll be on the 7th of November 2026. So he's kind of betting and gambling and guessing. But at the same time, I think he's quite worried about this great big shift that's happened in the polls. And that's basically happened because since Luxcon's been in government, we've been in a recession. There was no recession at all, obviously, under Labor. And when you technically look at it, the recession moved. And the numbers kind of are a bit dynamic, but they indicated that this deep double dip recession we're in now all happened under a National Party watch. And they were doing things at that time, they knew this was coming, which were just the wrong things to do. And so I think the public are kind of waking up to the fact that they basically gave tax cuts at the very point when you shouldn't be doing that. They basically had to pay for those. They drove things even further down, and they also crashed the construction industry. They cancelled a lot of projects and people lost their jobs. I mean, talking tens of thousands. So, basically they really slowed everything down and they made it worse. And the recovery, that they talk about hasn't really happened. So the data, the deep data sort of shows this is going to go on for quite a long time if you listen to the economists. So Mike, I think, is very, very worried. And I'm not sure if he even appreciates all these matters, but it appears to me that Mike is actually increasingly becoming a bit unhinged in the way that he's talking. And it's a little bit disturbing to watch him kind of being incoherent. He was going on about, for example, the fact we'd had a by-election, and in that election nobody voted, which was meant to mean only a few people voted. And then of those that did vote, it was mainly TPM that voted. So there it is, Labor, no matter what you do, you can't beat TPM, and you're going to need TPM, so you better rule them in. And why I think he's saying this is because Mike's been reduced to things like ridicule. Mike wants to ridicule the left, he wants to ridicule the Greens, and he wants to ridicule Te Pāti Māori. And that's all he's got. He actually can't have a decent argument toe-to-toe rationally. So he ridicules. And those matters that are raised by the Greens, for example, that the climate and climate science does matter, that the heating up of the world or a coming ice age, whatever's going to happen, all the damage, the floods, everything like that, it is preventable. We could actually do more than we're doing. We're passing this 1.5%, and it's time to actually take that stuff seriously instead of continuing to kind of pander to fossil fuels and the petroleum industry. So, yeah, I don't think you'll ever convince Mike, but we've got this guy, Mike, who's representing those interests and in the biggest platform. And we say, oh, he's the king of radio. But I think that's possibly, quite bad for New Zealand because it's really representing these great big, fossil fuel industry giants because it's petrol forever, right? And he loves his car and all that kind of thing. So we're seeing all of that, and we're also seeing, arguments from the Greens that are around the economy, that we basically don't need to continue to do what we were doing in the 1980s and 1990s forever, and they're challenging neoliberalism and that paradigm, which has never worked. And of course, Mike's a strong believer in those libertarian ideas. So once again, you've got this kind of ideological bias which drives this ridicule because you can't really have a proper argument with them about what they're saying. So when you see that kind of scoffing and the eye rolling and the name calling, that's because there's no way they can have a proper argument. So they need to win some other way, and that's by creating division, I think. Today we also saw this Laura McClure come out from the ACT Party and put a members' bill in the tin, saying that they're going to try and do away with the Broadcasting Standards Authority. And the rationale there, along with spelling mistakes in the press release from ACT, were sort of gathered around the idea that this was a institution that was a legacy institution who had done its time and no longer was needed. It was in a time when we had a couple of radio stations, a couple of television stations, and it mattered then, and people used to pay that fee and etc., etc. But now we just need to get rid of it because we need to update because everything's different. And then you run into these ideas that, you're trying to patrol free speech if you actually extend your remit at all. On the other side of it all, we've got this kind of idea where democracy relies on truth and accuracy and balance in the reporting that we get. Otherwise, what happens is you get the people with the most money, aka the ACT Party and who they represent, dominating the narratives to all of us and nobody holding them to account. And they have the loudest speakers and the loudest voices. And that's really, really wrong. It creates further problems. The ones we're seeing just get accelerated. So obviously there's quite a lot of public education here, and most people don't want to get rid of their broadcasting standards. They want those standards, and Davey Seymour doesn't. And so again, we've got this kind of battle going on in New Zealand for the right to actually have, good reporting and journalism, and not just kind of fake news and people who are driving a barrow, if you like, and omitting a whole lot of things. So there we go. That's a couple of bits of news. Again, there's this feeling I think everyone's got about the Regulatory Standards Bill, where they're all a bit bummed out that that's actually gone into law. And there's this terrible thing around education happening at the moment with Erica. There was a bit of a good piece there by Vincent O'Malley, I think, in The Guardian not too long ago, where he basically talked about some people who had been behind the ideas that we need to change in our curriculum. And he was sort of saying, look, this is people's real life experiences when they suddenly realize when they're standing at a grave and they've just been taught the history of our country, who and what happened here, who died and what happened here. They question, well, why wasn't I taught that in school? How come I don't even know my own history? How come I can be related to people and have no idea through an entire education that is paid for by the state, and never ever encountered this once? And so this idea that Indigenous histories and local histories are completely being erased by the libertarians, from the Atlas Network, that kind of don't care, have come in, swooped in, and called that erasure, I think, of those kind of stories that we should know in our own country, a rebalancing. So they call this kind of erasure rebalancing. And so whilst it may be true that there's some, there might have been a monolithic story there, or to some extent being crafted into the curriculum, I think they've overreached and gone too far and taken too much out. And I think we were at one stage kind of consulting and working with everybody and building up these curriculums over a period of years. But it seems now that the ears are closed, that it's a lobbying, it's a kind of a hand-picked selected group. The people that will make decisions have been stacked and appointed into those roles. And so that's how control and, the sort of driving through of a particular agenda happens in our education system, which isn't really necessarily very good for us. So I think there's a lot of concern about what Erica Stanford is doing there, and it's not necessarily going to make people achieve more or do better by not knowing their own history. So there is also those sort of stories. As you know, Trump has actually signed an executive order and lowered the beef tariffs because he had some domestic pressure from people who were finding it too hard. The cost of living was biting too much, and he was being affected in the polls. So he's basically scrapped their beef tariffs, which means good news for New Zealand exporters who export beef into America, and for Australia. Australia's delighted. Basically, they see what Trump has done with tariffs as a kind of a form of self-harm, where you harm your own population. So this is the case, and I think there'll be some rejoicing for some farmers. And people were speculating, well, it won't be long, will it, before the National Party will be taking credit for this, or they'll be trying to link their relationship and their deep relationship with Trump to sort of a lowering of the tariffs. And that's because we've become used to this kind of false credit stealing. You know, all that story around inflation and how the National Party always positioned itself to kind of catch the ride, somebody else's ride that they had built, like the Reserve Bank with the OCR had brought down inflation and it had been projected to come down and arrived within the range exactly when the projections said they would back in November 2022. And so the National Party really didn't make a lot of difference to inflation, but they are frequently saying, oh, look, we brought down inflation, the royal we, and they really didn't. They just happened to be catching a ride. And the same can be said, I think, here with GDP. They thought they were going to ride an increase in growth as there was going to be a recovery, and all of the forecasts said that GDP growth would be up by now. So that's why they were going on and on about, I see green shoots, because they were confident that the forecasts would come true and things would rise, and then they could take a ride on the forces in the economy that were going to make things grow anyway. So this is like a return to more tourists, more migrants. Just coming here means more customers. So, something as simple as that can grow GDP. But it doesn't mean everyone's happier or better off. In fact, it just highlights the fact that there are fewer and more scarce resources, for example, or a bigger deficit in our infrastructure, as more and more people try and use the same things, like the same roads and the same hospitals. So, it's not necessarily the case it's all good, and it needs to operate in a sort of a speed that we can actually tolerate if we are going to develop, and it sort of needs to be planned. But these are things that Davey Boy and all those other guys are not really big believers in. Anyway, I just thought I would mention a few of those kind of things that had happened. We've basically come to the end of another G News update on a Saturday evening, and it's a really, really nice evening here at Waiheke Island, out on the deck. I'm just looking out over the Kaka Valley, where all the kaka fly up and down in small squadrons of about 5 or 6 at a time. And Vicky's in the kitchen making some kind of dinner. I don't know what it'll be tonight. Possibly won't have it. Sometimes I just skip a meal these days because I don't really need it. Anyway, have a wonderful evening, everyone, and I'll talk to you all again soon.
Welcome to G News, the good news.
Yeah.